I call the honourable member for Hughes.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome and support this motion of apology to say sorry to our Indigenous Australians, especially to those who were forcibly removed from their mothers, their families and their communities, indeed their land. Firstly, in rising, I offer my respect to the traditional owners of this land here in Canberra, the Danna Vale people, and also to the traditional owners of the land in my electorate of Hughes, the Darawal in the coastal regions of Sutherland Shire, and the Cabregol peoples of the Liverpool region, who architects suggest have inhabited the land for over 40,000 years. I know there are many of my constituents who will heartily approve of my support for this motion, but as to be expected in the healthy, robust democracy that is Australia today, there are those who will not understand, and I would seek to explain to them my reasons. To those who say that this generation, our current generation of Australians, have no share in the responsibility of actions of generations past, I point out that the policy of removal was a government policy, and it was carried out under the orders of Commonwealth and state parliaments over several decades. Parliaments, unlike human beings, command an inherent timeless sovereignty. For example, authorised agreements or contracts, treaties or memorandums of understanding of a parliament, as well as its legislation, continue from one government to another and are honoured as existing formal instruments of the parliament. Indeed, parliaments could not be effective as the ultimate authority of our nation if it were otherwise. Therefore, it is right and fitting that this parliament is the appropriate legal entity to publicly and humbly express sorrow and contrition for this shameful blight on our national escutcheon. And I'm grateful that I'm actually here as one of its federal members of parliament to be able to add my name to those who support this motion. And I agree with the comments from the member for Oxley, who said that he felt that this was perhaps one of the most significant events here in this parliament. Whether the children were stolen or rescued, whether the cause was either fear of or actual abuse, neglect or outright danger from harm, the permanent separation of children from their mothers and communities is not the way to correct any perceived social concern. Whatever the good intentions of our forefathers may have been to save these children, and we all know that the road to hell is indeed paved by good intentions, the forced removal of children on a permanent basis from their mothers is a gross act of inhumanity and emotional cruelty. The well-documented stories of the subsequent periods of many of the lives of these children reveal too many who were neglected, abused and violated by the separation. While no doubt there were many who were educated and who lived in caring environments, we now also know that far too many experienced a living hell on earth. There are many who have lived in constant fear of physical danger. However, because of their forced separation from their mothers and families, we now know that all, even those who were properly cared for, suffered severe emotional and psychological scarring that continued for the rest of their lives and for many still continue to this day. And what of the mothers? How did they live any kind of life after their children were taken? How could they have found any kind of peace or respite from their distraught and their anguish? I would have gone mad if any of my children were ever taken from me. The good intentions of the Parliament, of the government of the day and of the welfare officers or other officials would have been utterly and totally irrelevant to a grieving and distraught mother. All she would know is that inexplicably and without just cause, her babies were taken by strangers and that she may never see them again. The very least this Parliament can do is say a very public and humble sorry to these children, to these mothers, and to indeed all of our nation's first people. And I am grateful to have been in this Parliament when this was able to be done. Hopefully, there will now be many Indigenous Australians who will know in their hearts that we here in this place have listened to their voices and have come to understand the terrible sufferings many have endured, though through seriously misguided intentions of good. Hopefully, with this powerful symbolic expression of sorrow expressed in the National Parliament, by the National Parliament, the healing can now really begin. There are those who have said that this is simply a grand symbolic gesture, but symbols have a real role to play in human relationships. They can represent a great promise of a new dawn in such relationships, and this one carries with it great importance for our future together. This is a new beginning, and this new dawn demands that we do not allow this sorry motion to be just all there is. We as a Parliament must ensure that it is a symbol that carries with it great substance in delivering equality and equity for all Australians, and that means addressing the disadvantage we know is grossly suffered by many of our Indigenous Australians today. The Prime Minister is quite right when he says, it is not sentiment that makes history, but it's our actions that make history. Now is the time to change the history of the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. I welcome the announcement from the Prime Minister and that he will establish a joint policy commission to be led by himself and the Leader of the Opposition to develop and implement, to begin with, an effective housing strategy for remote communities over the next 5 years. This is an excellent next step because while housing is vital for the proper care of families, individual home ownership is a greater leverage for true equality and equity for Indigenous Australians. The community title system of land ownership in remote communities, where all land is actually owned by the community itself or a land council, is nothing other than a communist collective. And indeed, I am concerned